This is the last of the 3 lectures that cover Neolithic and pre-dynastic Egypt through the Old Kingdom and the evolution of the pyramid and the artwork of the Old Kingdom. So we finish this section with the Great Pyramids of Giza. And here they are. These are the next logical evolution of the pyramid structure. So in the last lecture, we looked at the mastaba through the pyramid, through those stepped mastabas, one above another. And in the little drawing, you saw where they would solidify it. And this is the end result of that. There's actually 3 pyramids in this picture, and I've got several different pictures that show them in different orientations. In this one, the biggest one is Khufu. It's farther away. It looks smaller because it's farther away, but it's actually the biggest pyramid. The little one in front is the pyramid to Menkaura, and then the one in the middle is the pyramid to Khafra. This is the architectural form that's most closely identified with Giza. It's a true pyramid, mathematically. It's got a square base. It's got 4 sloping triangular faces. And originally they were smooth, smooth, smooth. They were as though you sanded them with a piece of sandpaper. And they were completely faced with polished limestone. So you'd have to imagine that if you saw them from a distance, they would be so shiny, they would reflect in a dark surface. They would reflect the sky, or they would reflect you as you walked up to it. So they would just be so bright because they're so reflective. They're first erected in the 4th dynasty. So Saqqara was the 3rd dynasty. This is the next dynasty. And the 4th dynasty is Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaura are the 3 main figures. These pyramids are near Cairo at Giza. They face the direction of the sunset. And at the time these were made, remember the geography has changed a lot, the site was a harbor. For many generations, and the people would come and see these. You remember these scientists that came with Napoleon? People thought these were grain silos. They didn't realize they were tombs. Some people think that the angled sides might have represented the rays of the sun. There's inscriptions on tombs 5 for the 5th and 6th dynasties do tell of kings climbing the rays of the sun to join Ra, the sun god. So perhaps the idea of this is that the Ka spirit would be climbing these perfect pyramidal shapes to get to the sun. There's many, many different theories about ways they raised these pyramids, different ideas about ramps, wheels, logs, mathematical calculations. One thing we know is that they did build them, and the blocks are several tons. I'm going to unpack the figures for you in a moment, and it is very difficult to imagine what it was like during the time they were actually building these things. From a slide like this, it's hard to get a sense of the scale of it, of the size of the blocks, the way in which they're so perfectly fitted together. No mortar. They're just fitted with precision. So this is the Pyramid of Khufu. It's the largest and the oldest of the 3. It's 13 acres at the base. It's 450 feet high. So it's a solid mass with the chamber hollowed out, of course. And it was all done by muscle power. Khafra was the son of Khufu, so his pyramid's a little bit shorter by 22 feet, and the only one left with the veneer at the top. So it's not a cap, it's just that the veneer hasn't come off this one, and you can see people in this slide. They're oriented on an east-west axis, and the 4 sides perfectly correspond to the 4 points of the compass. There are 2,300,000 stones in Khufu's pyramid. And each one weighs 2.5 tons each, so like 2.5 pickup trucks if you got a 1-ton truck. Here's a cross-section of Khufu's pyramid. And so it weighs 6,500,000 tons. They must have done that by calculation, I think. Anyway, the core is made out of limestone, precisely cut, and then they faced it with white limestone, but the burial chamber inside is all faced with granite, because granite is harder and limestone is more brittle. Here's one theory about building the pyramid is you can see all these people with the method of ropes, and they're moving this big block on these logs. You can see the overseer watching over everybody. And one thing that's kind of interesting, and this is a thing that stonemasons sometimes do today, or sculptors, they put wooden wedges inside the stone, and then they would wet the wedge. You ever do this when you split a log? It works. And it's also, you can do it with ice. So if you're splitting wood in the winter, like you can pound your wedges in and let them, get them really wet, and then they'll freeze. And so they would, although I don't think that they were using the freezing part in ancient Egypt, but they would wet them, and then the wood would expand. It would help crack the stone. Now, this is actually an architectural model of the Giza Plateau, but it kind of gives you a sense of where these pyramids are from the air. So the Great Sphinx is right here. So Khufu is over here on the right, and then Khafra's pyramid is just a little bit shorter, 22 feet. Then Menkaura's is this little one over here, well, comparatively speaking. So at the chapel of the funerary temple, and each one, of course, has its own, people would come there, they'd offer the king food and drink, and then they would entomb the food inside the pyramid. So it was a long ritual that they would do. Now, next to the causeway leading to Khafra's pyramid is the Sphinx, which has the body of a lion and the head of a human. The function, of course, is to guard the burial places, and it's guarding the west, where the sun mysteriously disappears. So it's guarding facing the night. The lion, of course, is a symbol of royalty, a symbol of power, and a symbol of the sun. So if the intelligence of the king is controlling the lion, it's a mighty power. There are 20 stone portraits of Khafra inside Khafra's Valley Temple. We want to make sure you had enough Ka statues. You can see these are all little pyramids, little tombs of other people around the outside, little mastabas. So it's a whole necropolis here. So this Sphinx, it's a joining of human intelligence and animal strength. And it's generally agreed that it's a portrait of Khafra. Of course, scholars will disagree about pretty much everything. There's a little blue spot here. You can see a person there. I point out the people in these images to give you a sense of the scale. So like the Ka statue of Zoser, it's staring into eternity. Although I would say that the expression is slightly different, slightly more benign, slightly more assured in his power, if you will. The word Sphinx is actually a Greek word for strangler. Some scholars think it's the features of Khufu. You can think, what you will. You can read about it. It's interesting. I mean, we don't really know. There's all kinds of theories out there about it. In later time, it actually gets connected with the sun god Ra, because it's near the Harmachis' temple. But most people think it's a portrait of Khafra, who, if you study Greek, you'll see him referred to as Chephren. So there were more stone portraits of Khafra inside his valley temple. Here is a Ka statue of Khafra. He's the mediator between the gods and the people. He's the god king. So this Ka statue is compact, it's clear, and this is the Ka statue that they would use during the burial ceremony. So they had the opening of the mouth ceremony. This stone that it's made of is this anorthite gneiss, and when the sun shines on it, it turns actually blue. So like the Sphinx, it's giving us this idea of calm, of permanence, this symbolic identification of the king and the throne. He's seated on the lion throne. You can see the lotus and the papyrus intertwined on his throne, power over Upper and Lower Egypt. And then, of course, the costume that we're familiar with from earlier images of the kings. He's wearing the kilt, the headdress with the cobra symbol of Ra. And now you see also on him this false beard, which signifies dignity. So they were all clean shaven, but they all wore these false beards. There's a skylight just above the statue, so when the sun shines down on it, it glows blue, as though it's glowing from within. And so if you look at Zoser's head down on the right, his forbidding, so Zoser is a conquering king. Zoser is the third dynasty. Zoser is establishing, he's strong, but Khafra is seated within his power. Both of them are gods. Both of them are worshipped as gods. And they both call themselves king, not pharaoh, that's king. So it's a great contrast in expression. Other sculpture from within the tombs at Giza, here's Menkaura, who was the son of Khafra, and he has the smallest pyramid. This is a very good example of the standing figure in Egyptian art. Now remember, there are so many sculptures and images we have from hundreds. So this is a survey class. I can only show you a few. So I tried to find some different things. This one is standing figures, and you can see the rectangular block just visible at the base. And if you've noticed so far, all of these sculptures are not freestanding in the sense that they're separated from the block. The block is part of what helps them stand up. So they're a single unit. They're tied together by the stone, and the queen is embracing Menkaura. These also were painted figures, but polishing is unfinished, so we don't know, whether they were fully painted or just some painted decoration on them. So we have some conventions here between the male and female in Egyptian art. The queen was below a king in the rank. Her size is the same, but her left foot's not coming as far forward. She's not as rigidly positioned, and you notice her arms are bent. The king has his fists clenched, and she's more naturalistic. The draperies outlining the curves of her body. She's not wearing this traditional kilt. She's shown as a woman. She's shown as just less formal. It indicates she has a lower rank. Again, their function is to embody the ka of their royal personages. They would receive food and drink. The priests were believed to have magic powers, that in the ritual, and remember, the people didn't go into the deep, deep inner part where the priests were, that the priests had a magic power that they literally transformed the offerings that the people brought into spiritual food and drink and gave it to these spirits, that they came alive, that they literally could feed these statues. This is the Mycerinus Triad. This is also from Giza. This is from the 4th dynasty. So we see Hathor, but she's wearing Khmer-Net-B, Queen Khmer-Net-B's features. And then on the left, there's a personification of the dog. Again, the same style as Menkaura Khmer-Net-B. So there's many, many of these for sale online. This actually has become an item of commerce. You can Google Mycerinus Triad and you find all sorts of copies of them. It's very common. This triad is a very common form. These are painted sculptures of Rahotep and Nofret, painted limestone, and they're both seated. This gives you a good idea of the type of adornment that they would wear. And most of the sculptures of the women, of course, would have been painted, so you can actually see her garment. Khmer-Net-B would have been painted in this way as well. Again, more distinctions between the male and the female. Nofret's fully clothed. Her husband's just wearing the lower garment. His fists are both clenched. The reason why we still have the paint on these is because they're made out of limestone. Here's some details of their heads. They're inlaid with rock crystal. Again, there's so many of these sculptures that have been looted. We don't know what kinds of precious stones or gems would have been on many of these sculptures, but we can get some kind of an idea here. We see these stylized eyes in Mesopotamian art of their time as well. Is it possible there could have been commerce between these two cultures? This wide staring eye is a convention that we're going to see again in Byzantine art too. This convention of the whitish skin tone for the woman and the darker skin tone for the man is a convention of Egyptian painting and painted sculpture. We see this over and over again. This is a seated scribe. So lots of things that are important about him. For one thing, the king is an administrator, which means that there's many, many documents. He's got an enormous kingdom to run. So he needs a scribe. This is a symbol of society in which reading and writing are the basis of wisdom, that there is political activity, that he has a very, very important function. So there's many sculptures of these seated scribes. So we have, one, this is our example. They're always shown in this particular posture with their legs crossed. They'll be holding the tools of their trade, a papyrus scroll and a reed. And you also see he's alert. It's a portrait. We know what this guy looked like. They're always represented as individuals, even to show, you notice he's a little bit flabby. That shows he's older. He has a status in which he doesn't have to do physical labor. He can put on a little bit of a paunch, and that's a status symbol. He had his own tomb. He has has rock crystal eyes. They're made out of calcite, and magnesite is mounted in copper. And he's made out of painted limestone. Here's Prince Ankhaf. He's lesser size, and it's a little bit more of a naturalistic sculpture. And this is going to become a trend in the Middle Kingdom. So this is sort of a precursor to that. He's got a typical round head. He's got an alert expression. He's holding a staff. Here's a portrait bust of him. And so he was actually a very important man. He was a vizier or a senior administrative official under Khafra. So all of these, I mean, they had many, many children, and the more important they were, the more important their positions in the court were. We don't really know what the function of the bust is, and we don't have that many busts in Egyptian art. It was never part of a larger statue, so we don't really know, but we do know that he's just very specifically portrayed. He's mature, he's intelligent.